from a leadership perspective, it's not an easy choice to go, well, let's just get rid of the Vandals. That's why almost 1 in 5 Vandals exist in an organization, because they're productive. Another reason I found is they've been there a long time.
Welcome to the Wellable Weekly podcast, where we cover the key topics and trends at the intersection of well-being, technology, and HR. I'm Geoff, and today we have a very special guest. Greg Hawkes is a keynote speaker, corporate culture expert, and best-selling author of Act Like an Owner. Greg has over 25 years of leadership experience across real estate, nonprofits, entrepreneurship. Greg gives leaders the frameworks and language to build trust, elevate accountability, and create cultures where people take real ownership of results. Greg, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's a great time to be here, Geoff. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 25 years across real estate, nonprofits, entrepreneurship. Tell me about the kind of the through line there. Tell me about the story of Greg.
Woo! The through line, I would definitely say, is a leadership kind of philosophy. I was a young leader back in, it's 2026 now, so 25 years. Yeah. In 2000, I took over a role as an executive director of a nonprofit that worked with young people. We ran summer camps, we did things, slept 800 kids a week and had thousands of kids through the summer come through. And so I did that for a decade, and I ran a lot of volunteers. I did a lot of traveling and recruiting and a lot of leadership development. There's a lot of volunteer space in the nonprofit world, just figuring out how to really build leaders. And in that same time, since I was in nonprofit, I was trying to figure out ways to generate revenue beyond what the nonprofit paid. And so I started buying single family homes, which I had no experience in at all. And so in that, and it was in Edmond, Oklahoma. So the risk was significant, but also compared to the rest of the world, real estate's pretty cheap there. And so I just started buying single family homes and landlord acted as the landlord and started getting people tenants. And so I discovered this owner-renter-vandal kind of idea and how it worked in my real estate and how it showed up in work where people I was paying weren't buying in, and there was people who were volunteering who were sacrificing everything to be there because they were so missional oriented and honestly just cared. They cared a lot. And so I was like, you can see this kind of mindset show up that has nothing to do with paychecks, but everything to do with heart and a way of thinking and that sort of things. And so throughout just the course of my career from there, I was like, man, this is the kind of place we want to shape. We want to shape a place where people care, where they think about things, and they show up with some good skills. And so that the through line is ownership, which is leadership in all the best ways.
Yeah. So it's interesting, you had that original kind of position where you're looking after nonprofits and then trying to find a way to have a revenue stream, but ownership's obviously at the heart of all of that. Is that kind of your origin story as well for Act Like an Owner? Was it just seeing what kind of came to fruition through all those efforts?
Yeah, just really realizing it in the midst of that, because it was like this dual track happening where I had this real estate, which I'd never done, and I'm not a handy person. So my entire real estate strategy is buy nice houses, put nice people in them. That was literally my strategy. Sure. And honestly, it paid off pretty well. It worked out. And then at the same time, I'm running these camps and I'm having 300 plus volunteers. I'm doing summer internships. I'm doing full-time employees, and I buff up my summer staff. And so I had these parallel things happening, and you could just kind of cross over and see the mindset and heart, because I literally had people live in some of my homes, took better care of it than I did. They're taking care of it so well because they made it there. They acted like they were owning it, and they were just renters in the financial terms, but the way they thought about it, cared about it, and the place they were shaping for their family was really special. And then in this same vein of people who I wasn't paying at all showed up and acted like they were full-time employees because they cared so much, and contrasting that then with people who I was paying and who weren't bringing their heart and weren't bringing their head, and then in my homes I also had some college boys that vandalized property. I'm like, oh, these guys are destructive. They set me way back and hurt me in all the ways. And you could see that even how people, and this working with the HR world, in the world of HR and the people business, how one person can be so detrimental because of the things they say and do, and just spread negativity, spread gossip, take actions that are really divisive. And so those are the people that became vandals in my world, and both literally and figuratively in the workspace.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point, right? You've brought up the HR world and the workplace. I mean, the recent kind of engagement data you can look at in a variety of sources. Gallup is obviously one that is really
It's the
prominent.
cornerstone, Geoff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty sobering, right?
Yeah.
Decade lows, and a lot of companies are responding with there's more RTO mandates. Everybody's trying to figure out how to establish a good mix of human capital and new technologies. So how do you think about this concept of acting like an owner when, for your average rank and file employee who's dealing with a lot of turbulence, both in maybe the broader economy and even in their own workplace?
Oh, definitely at work, definitely at home. Like you can't escape it. So a couple things is, I mean, I love Gallup's stuff. And what's interesting, so if you look at the 25 years, so I looked at it in light of since I started buying properties and now, and because they've been doing it for 26 years, I think, as well. And here's what you'll find. That dang middle line that everybody's so excited about, the disengaged, it bumps 1 point one way, down another point. It literally has a +2 or -2 over 25 years. It is not, because they'll talk about going up 1 or up 2, and it's like 50%, 52%. Oh, we're at like 53%. Literally this high, and then it'll drop down to 50, but it's always in a ±2 over 25 years. People like, I don't say it's a wasted time. What I say is the disengaged aren't as bad as people make them out to be. Those, in my terminology, are renters, and they're every other person in the American workforce and have been for 25 years. And there's all this hoopla around the disengaged, and that's not where the magic's at. The magic's at, in Gallup's number, they do a thing, they do engage, disengage, and actively disengaged. And if you look at the 25-year span, it's actually pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, what happened is the actively disengaged numbers dropped. The people who are my vandals, and my philosophy is arrest and evict, get those vandals out, figure out with the disengaged how to create lease purchase options, renters to buy back in. But people want to get the disengaged to engaged, and they focus on the disengaged, and it's the wrong strategy, just plainly speaking. It's these actively disengaged. If you look at Gallup's number, when they dip, when you deal with those people who are about 17%, and it fluctuates 1 or 2% also, when you deal with them, the numbers on the engaged go up. You don't get more people engaged by dealing with the disengaged. You get more people engaged by dealing with the actively disengaged, because that's where the friction is, because these disengaged folks go, hey, if these people are getting away with this, if you tolerate this, why should I give more? Why should I care more? And so when you deal with this lower rung and deal with that, the disengaged jump to being higher engaged. It's a really interesting, like if you do Gallup into 25 years, you can see that play out. And so I think a lot of people ops strategies that focus on the disengaged are just wasting a lot of time and money. And they'll see it because they'll get 1 point bump or they get a 2 point bump, and that's it. Because dealing directly with that isn't where the solution is in getting the people to be engaged. And so, yeah, I'm always like, figure out your vandals, man. Deal with the vandals, deal with that actively disengaged, and you'll see your engaged numbers bump.
I mean, you compared the actively disengaged to the vandals, right? And I think
that is my terminology for it.
That's definitely an illustrative way to position that. How, I mean, with vandals, as you noted, you evict, right? You solve the problem that way. I mean, do you see organizations just trying to take a harder line on, if folks aren't really kind of adhering to the company standards or the
well, I mean, that's what's interesting about it, Geoff. Because just think about your own home, or if you owned investment properties, or people that are listening, why would you let a vandal live in your home in the first place? So this is the paradox, and what makes there's such a friction point. It's like, well, if people are destructive, why aren't they getting them out? The problem is they're the people who most people call toxic or not team players, but what they are generally, I've found 4 categories for them. Number one thing is they're revenue generators. So the problem is they're highly productive. They're generating big money. They just don't want to participate in all of your team and your culture and all that. They're just like, listen, I'm out making sales, I'm out doing things. It's kind of in your role. You're like, listen, I'm practically paying for all of you people who are complaining about me, but if it wasn't for me, you guys couldn't even. So that's the friction for leadership. It's not that, oh, these guys are just wretched folks, let's just get rid of them. The problem is they're highly effective and they just don't want to play along. They just don't want to wrap around to the idea of team and culture. Generally speaking, that's what makes them a vandal. They're like, listen, I'm going to just go do my thing, and y'all should just be grateful I'm going to do my thing. And so that's the tension point, because for leaders, it's like, yeah, everybody's like, oh, that gal, she's not a team player. He's not a, They're like, well, he's also like bringing in half the business. So from a leadership perspective, it's not an easy choice to go, well, let's just get rid of the Vandals. That's why almost 1 in 5 Vandals exist in an organization, because they're productive. Another reason I found is they've been there a long time. Sometimes people are in there 10, 20, 30 years, and it's just awkward to try to get rid of them now. Like, they say things, they do things that they've always gotten away with. And so at this point, you're kind of like, let's just hope we don't get a lawsuit. Let's hope they don't say something. But it's not as easy as the idea of like, oh, and that's why Vandals exist in organizations. Third, I found is nepotism, like it's a real thing. And so sometimes in family businesses, there's a lot of upsides, and sometimes there's this ambassador status that can happen. Now, it's not that all of these people are Vandals. It's just I've found when somebody is a Vandal, they typically fall into one of these categories. And the last one, Geoff, you'll find funny, is that they're the owner of the company. Is that sometimes people who have started a business and have been there, they're like, I was here before you, I'll be here after you. So they'll say and do things that are divisive amongst the teams, that doesn't create unity and doesn't create forward motion, but because they just kind of have a perspective like, I can do this without you anyhow. And that's in family businesses, maybe smaller businesses, that I have found people will use their words and attitudes even when they started the thing, and they just don't realize how destructive their own words can be with some of their team members. So it's not an easy play. That's the deal. It's like, it feels like, but that's why it's a risk. It's a risk to be like, if you deal with this lower group, the challenge is then you've got to believe some of these other people are going to like step up, and that's what happens. But it's a risky move, and it doesn't happen overnight. And so leaders have a great friction point for making those kind of decisions on how much they value culture, how much they value the whole in light of these individuals.
I think that's the crux of the situation, right? Most of the leaders I talk to say, the gap is in knowledge, right? They know what good culture looks like. They know what bad culture looks like. The gap is execution and having the, fortitude to commit to
totally what it is.
An approach and a standard of execution, a standard of kind of culture, compliance in a way. But why do you think that it exists so commonly across organizations of all type? And then, the latter example you gave, where the owner of the company is kind of setting the wrong tone from the top. I kind of get how that would be difficult to change, but for others where there seemingly is strong management in place, they're trying to establish cultural norms and expectations that seemingly on the surface level would be consistent with a higher performing organization, but then there's that gap that leads to still a segment or a cohort of actively disengaged employees that isn't addressed with in the way that you described.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things that are in play, and you know this as well as I do. The manager, leader, operator, being the person who has responsibilities to steward people, right? They've been gifted and trusted with leading people, and then they also have a job to do. And so they're functioning in this role of responsibility as well as functioning in a leader-manager position, and it's not always transferable. Like, a lot of people rise to leadership but aren't really effective at having hard conversations, at communicating effectively, at having an emotional intelligence on the different people that they're leading and how to engage with them. And so then when it comes to addressing issues, they sometimes just are not great at it. So what I found with culture is that if you don't have leaders that are have built-in consistent habits, because you're not going to sustain culture with checklists. It's like we've got to be really conscious when we're saying this is who we are, this is how we are, these are our values, these are our norms, these are our behaviors, these are our anti-behaviors. When we incorporate that, then there just has to be a standardized consistency, whether it's in every meeting that they start out with the values, or they start out. I always encourage leaders to start out with a difficulty that they're facing. Hey, listen, our value is integrity. I don't know what. And this week I had an opportunity to not be 100% truthful with one of our clients or our customers because I just didn't know. So I could have been like 85% truthful, and I was just but integrity is our deal. So I did. It was an awkward conversation. Didn't like it. They didn't like it, but we worked through it. Like, leaders sharing the challenge they have with living out the values week in, week out is a really streamlined approach to accelerating trust and creating opportunities for other people to be willing to share their challenges and difficulties. That's one of the great challenges is most people aren't candid and they haven't fostered an environment where there's what I call thick trust, a thick enough trust that has an absorptive quality where it's like, hey, we can say things around here that expose a little bit of our weaknesses or our deficiencies. And then in that we can deal with them. And so leaders aren't well practiced at exposing those things. And so when you build a habit of saying, here's a struggle I've had this week as a leader, here's something that I faced in light of our values, not your own personal morals or, I failed this week and whatever. But it's like in light of our company and who we are and how we are, here's something I faced this week that I put it to the test. This is why our values are so foundational. That's why we call them core values. They're essential for us. And I operate out of that. It then lets the team know I can talk about these things out loud. It's better for me to align with the values than to shortcut them. And so to answer your question, it's the consistency of habits. It's the structure of mindset that a leader brings to how do I keep platforming these and not feeling like every meeting we start out and we read our values and here's our value. And it's like we're doing our thing. And it's like, it's not because they're not alive. And so better than going, all right, we're just going to read over our 5 values this week, and we start every meeting out by, it's like, here's one way I interfaced with the value this week, and here's what made it hard for me. Like, you do that with a minute in your opening, it does infuse in people the reality of what it means to have a culture.
That's a nice distinction between kind of preaching values, right, and just espousing the importance of them and restating them in your example, right, and actually allowing managers or higher level executives to demonstrate some level of vulnerability and explaining how they try to live these values day in, day out, and they do it to the best of their ability, but there are inevitably challenges, and giving some examples that show how they're navigating tough situations and how they can use those values as kind of a North Star to help them make a decision when maybe there are no great options is probably
as is usually the case, right?
Yeah,
it's not as easy as right and wrong and do the right thing and it's way more gray than that.
Totally. And I think, we've seen over the last really couple of years, right? You've seen massive layoffs across a couple different big industries. Tech obviously has been taking a beating, but still, healthcare and others.
Yeah.
You're cutting, in some cases, tens of thousands of jobs, and those companies are still posting, strong earnings. So, employees see that, they notice the math, like that must erode trust. And, how do you think that leaders can rebuild that trust if they've gone through, an organization's gone through a pretty substantial layoff? When people who are still there, they're obviously going to be watching pretty closely and listening intently on what they hear from.
Listen, Geoff, I have a client that has now the last 2 years done a 10% RIF, just and they just did it. They just had to do it. And while they did it, then they added overseas employees. They literally started international because the ratio of, price per head and output just made so much more sense. So not only is it, hey, we've doing this reduction in force, we're also now actually hiring from another country and we're planting an office there, which, you just feel like that's kind of offensive. You're like as an employer, you're like, wait a second, we just got rid of so-and-so and we added 5 more people literally at the same cost that are intelligent, like capable. So the conversation, what I appreciate about this client is they're at least upfront about it. They're talking about it while it's happening. And all it does is just create fear because everybody's like, and they're able to say that, like, because they're like, who's it going to be? We don't know. And they thought they did it once. And they're like, all right, we did it once. And they're in the tech space and they're in the HR space. And it's an interesting, so they're like, hey, a year has gone by and we have to do it again. And it's new leadership. And so, the idea of transparent communication as much as you can, at least for the people remaining, it has a level of respect that says, listen, the numbers just aren't working. Like it literally is nothing personal. It feels very personal, but we just are in a space that's the pressures to make sales and be effective and achieve what we need to achieve from our goals and just not working. So we have to keep making these shifts. And when they do that, because it's just not easy. Like nobody's like, oh great, I'm glad I got fired. Thanks for that. Nobody feels that way, but the people who remain, who know that you've been upfront from the beginning and in the process, and knowing why, right? It's not like this. It's not like the senior leadership's getting big bumps at Christmas and there's like it's a legitimate like we're all feeling this pain at our levels, and we're doing the best we know how. That is the only thing you can do. Like that is literally because when the numbers aren't working and you have to make those choices. Transparent, proactive communication is what keeps trust intact, even when the decisions are hard, even when the consequences are painful. The only thing that really enables a leader to retain the trust is the integrity of, I'm going to be transparent through this process, and I'm going to share my own disappointment in where we're at and doing what we know to do, and please rally around us, and this is what we're trying to do to keep us all going forward.
Right. That transparency seems like it's again one of those core values that you would hope is part of any organization's kind of guiding principles, right? But harder to do in practice.
Oh, it's way hard because it feels as a leader, you're like as a leader, the responsibility is just stability and forward vision, and let's create optimism. And so they have their own friction on like, I'm here to encourage and inspire hope, and keep moving. And also then I have to be the bearer of bad news, and I have to make the hard decisions that really impact people's lives who I care about, who a lot of our people care about. It's not, and that's why leadership is just such a difficult position, because you have to maintain both those optimism, positivity, forward vision, and dealing with the realities of the marketplace, of the economy, of our own numbers, and where we're at. And that's just a constant friction.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I feel like, again, a topic that's just dominated kind of the headlines, right? These last few years is how AI is reshaping pretty much, every job. And there are some, of course, industries that are, more early adopters, and it's changing how, tech companies, work and operate. But for other, industries where maybe it hasn't completely reshaped a job yet, but it's so topical and something that it seems to have created this just underlying level of concern among employees. Will it change my job? It's not offshoring like the example you gave, but certainly there are situations where CEOs are saying, well, why can't I just replace XYZ functional group or group of coworkers with AI? So how would you advise a client who's coming to you and saying, Greg, we don't really have a firm kind of game plan for how we're planning to incorporate AI into our workforce? Should we, in a spirit of transparency, should we communicate something like that? Or is just kind of staying mum on the topic the better approach in the absence of good information?
I don't think mum is an option, and I also I'm not proposing that leaders just share everything, because there is strategic kind of deployment on how things roll out. With AI, what I find interesting, and I've got kids now, they're 23 and 26, so they're Gen Z, full on. But just even, I don't know, you've seen like the college graduations where like people were booing, and like the response of like even the alpha and the Gen Z, like there's this really interesting kind of revolt that's like, and it's not just in the job, it's just like the artificiality of it, just the idea of like, which, as old guy, I think, oh, it's so embedded in their life, it's just part of who they are. But it's like the whole, just when they used to do filter, like when they used back in Snapchat days where like the filters, you could originally change and people loved it and gravitated towards it. But now the outcome of it is there's just this resistance toward artificiality, which I think is really beneficial for the human race. It's like, okay, because as an older, I'm Gen X, I'm like, oh, they're just all gonna go artificial, and they're all gonna put the headphones on, and they're all gonna go on into that world. But there's this like resistance, and so to apply that then in the workplace, the idea of how it's being utilized is really fascinating, because again, speaking of this, one of my clients, HR, tech, in like 3 years, Claude could probably build this software. If you were in leadership and you're like, hey, listen, we're outsourcing to this, we're using this company, we want to build our own payroll system, our own wellness system. We want to build. Claude could probably do that for you, probably in less than 3 years. But it's the little nooks and crannies. It's the little, hey, this thing didn't work. Who do we go to? So I think the philosophy that people have come to is like, it's not that AI is going to take a lot of jobs. It's that AI is going to be the best partner we could have. And if you're not equipped to work with AI, then you're not going to stay in the seat. You've got to understand this partner we have now that's a all-knowing, being, if you will, who's not a being. He has no soul, but he has the ability to access all knowledge. How you utilize that. So the idea of leadership talking about how this tool can make us more efficient, more productive, more effective. Our human nature isn't going to be like, oh, good, the robots take over and we'll all go to a beach. Like, that's just not the nature of, first of all, capitalism, that our whole economy is based upon. It's not like, oh, okay, somebody else is going to work and I'll just go and they're going to just give me money. Like, that's not going to happen. So how do we become proficient in working with it? Whether it's because, the magic hasn't yet quite happened, right? Like, the people have replaced, and then you're like, oh, we need humans to manage this whole thing. So I think the integration and execution of it is a lot of good opportunity, because it's different than the internet, but also similar. And I was there when the internet came on. You're like, oh my gosh, it's going to take. It's like, well, if you become proficient, it really actually created a lot more opportunity than it took away. And that's the internet now. There's people who have businesses, the things you're doing, the whole world exploded in really positive ways. But there was a similar fear of how it's going to impact humanity. And I think I know AI is different than that, but if you can take that same philosophy, it has the potential to create a lot more opportunity for the humans than diminish the opportunities within business, because whole new businesses are sprouting up, whole new opportunities. So it's as much, and I don't even know if it's skill working, because you don't have to be a coder, you don't have to be anything. You just have to be creative, intelligent, inquisitive, curious. You have to
good questions.
willing to experiment. Like, AI is really a great partner in all businesses, and so I think business leaders at their best will train humans how to be more creative in the use of it. So I work with a lot of accounting firms also, and so AI can do a lot of number crunching. So like, even in coding, like the thing that 10 years ago was like, get in a computer, you'll have a lot, you'll forever, because computers are forever. And it's like, shoot, that didn't turn out. Now the computers can code themselves, and this thing, and that's that's part of nature. So I'm not as fearful of the demise of the work of humans as I am that people aren't as smart to become proficient in how to engage and utilize, whether it's automation, whether it's creativity, because there's all the music. Like, it's like this, the music, Suno. I've got a friend that does it. You just create a song. I could write a song every day, put it out. But what's the point? Like that. If I just want to be an artificial, it's like, I'm going to try to get Spotify. I'm going to game Spotify. That's not that's not a meaningful existence. I think at some point humans come back to, and all of us are like, well, what's the purpose and calling? What's the meaning that I'm bringing to the world? And can my job be a part of helping that fulfill that? And can AI help me accelerate my own sense of mission in the world? Long answer. I'm sorry, Geoff. I know it's because there's no really simplicity to it. I think it's a great partner if we can incorporate it wisely into the workplace.
And that's, maybe it's a mindset or again, an approach that organizations can take as viewing it, right? Obviously, Microsoft coined the term co-pilot for their version of it, but thinking of it as a co-pilot, thinking of it as not a job replacer or a total disruptor, as much as to your point, something that can unlock hopefully more opportunities and ways of working. When you think about something like this, right, where you have a big, kind of transformational technology that's taking hold, what are some of the guiding principles through your own Act Like an Owner book and the ownership message series that you feel like, regardless of the situation, whether you're a manager or even, again, like a rank and file employee, to fall back on to help process go through a thought process, kind of like you just went through, to rationalize and figure out a good path forward.
Our conversation around transparency and trust is pretty foundational to kind of anything that we're facing. So the idea of being able to speak openly about fears, which is not a common sensation at work, but when you create a culture, that's why I do work around culture, because you design these spaces where like we can freely speak about these things, and it's like it diminishes the mind game that takes place, because a lot of the AI stuff people are whispering about and talking about, and they're all fear in their mind, but they're not just having let's just have real honest conversations. Let's look at every quarter how we're utilizing, corporately speaking, the automated, Claude has really been a prominent. I love ChatGPT for creative brainstorming idea. They each kind of play a role. I've got a friend who uses Grok to create images. Weirdly, he does 3 ABCs, and Grok has been, so it's they all have some of the things they play to, and all people's personality. So I think the transparency of the experimentation that's happening with it, because at this moment it's still really experimentation in a majority of businesses, mid-size, small size, and even at large organizations. A lot of pilot programs happening, a lot of test cases. Again, talking about those and imagining how they can be utilized alongside our people. I think some of the automation stuff is going to remove, when it comes to accounting, when it comes to just stuff that's just factual, and there is so the communication piece on it, what we're testing and attempting, the empowering of others to, the empowering of team members to test their own utilizes. Microsoft is really dominated with Copilot. It's I'm on Teams conversations a lot with people, and so in the corporate, that Copilot's let's just experiment with what it can do and just do a weekly experimentation. I do this ownership accelerator where it's kind of a 6-week cohort with leaders that I do virtually, and part of our activities, because the virtual experience, it can be transformed through the AI also. So we did instead of activities, I did hey, owner-renter-vandal, put into chat, put into your preferred AI, what does it look like when you're an owner? What does it look like when you're a renter? What does it look like? And it created these images. And then we talked, another session was hey, we've got, if you were a restaurant, and your core values were the menu, what would be some of the attributes and characteristics? So it created a menu, and it designed all these things that are so interesting about capturing the culture, capturing priorities, capturing the goals, even for the quarter. So utilizing it and being able to say, hey, I put in all the information, and this is what it spit out. It's very interesting looking and really kind of cool. But being able to play with it, as well as experiment with it, as well as utilizing it functionally, is really useful. I think using it to replace writing emails is the worst. I think just I read stuff on LinkedIn, I'm oh my gosh, I just can't even I have that rebellion towards just reading. Because some of because what's funny is it uses the best of the best, but it's all redundant. You're okay, I get this contrast thing. Most people think blah blah blah, or it's gonna be. I'm oh my gosh, I can't even read this anymore. And so I'm just have a natural inclination, and I think that's true of a lot of humans. And to see that with the young people, I'm really surprised by it, and I'm that's good. Yeah. Humanity's gonna survive.
Yeah. That's right. There's hope. There's hope.
Yeah.
Well, Greg, where can folks go to if they want to find your book, this ownership message series? Where would be the best place?
Just the website, greghawks.com, GREGHAWKS.com. That's the easiest place. It's all there. I love LinkedIn also. I'm in the professional space, and I do a lot of, hang out with a lot of people in the people business. So LinkedIn's a great place to connect also. Just Greg Hawks. Just look there, and I'm pretty prominent.
Perfect. We'll find you there. Well, Greg, thanks so much for joining, and thanks to our listeners for tuning in. You can always catch the Wellable Weekly podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods. And feel free to subscribe to the Wellable Weekly newsletter for all your latest insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Geoff.
Thanks, Greg.